Tonight on Nova Legends podcast, I have professors Preston and David Green, West Potomac grads. I think actually Preston might have been still Fort Hunt grad, but
Fort Hunt.
yeah. Anyway, UVA guys like me, incredibly credentialed guys, and been huge helps in the social media stuff we've been doing. Guys, great to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to give you guys his credentials. It might take a while, so I hope folks are comfortable at home. I'll start with Preston. Preston is older. Preston's 85, Fort Hunt, right, Preston?
Right.
Okay. And you're John and Maria Neag, professor of urban education, also professor of law at UConn.
Oh,
Uh,
educational leadership and law. Educational leadership and law. UConn.
okay, leadership
Yeah,
and law.
yeah.
Okay, got it. Yep. You're 89 UVA graduate, government graduate, 92 Columbia Law. You got your doctorate in education, 95 at Columbia as well. You weren't done getting educated. And then you've been in academia, in management and also teaching and as a professor at Amherst, Penn State, and UConn for I think the last, how long, Preston? About 10 years?
Oh, well, first I want to say it's UMass Amherst. The Amherst people kill me, but UMass Amherst.
Okay.
And I've been teaching now, yeah, since almost 30 years now. My goodness.
It's incredible. We're getting old. At least you
Yeah, we're
guys
getting
are.
old, man.
Yeah.
Gray
So
beards.
yeah. And also, David is an 87 graduate of West Potomac. He did 2 years at Fort Hunt when the schools, Fort Hunt and Groveton combined to form West Potomac at the old Groveton site. Um, he is he's a 91 graduate of Boston University, mechanical engineering. He's lettered in football and track. That's incredible and to do engineering. Um, he got a master's in engineering as well. Dave, remind me where you got that from again?
University of Maryland in civil engineering,
That's right. And you're also a graduate assistant there as well.
and I got a
The
PhD.
last almost 20 years, you've been a
I got to
advisor and
throw it
then
in.
associate.
Hey,
I'm
hold on
sorry.
one second. I got a master's in civil environmental. I have a PhD in chemical engineering, and I
Oh
got
my
that
goodness.
on my
Yeah.
back.
I do too, but I don't like to talk about it. I just have them just in case I ever need them. I have all these engineering degrees. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. And then the last 20 years or so, you've been first an advisor, but now an associate professor at UVA, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, and is that applied math is the third one there, David?
Oh, this is the School of Applied Math, School of Engineering Applied Math. I'm in the departments of material science, chemical engineering, and I have a courtesy appointment in mechanical engineering.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you guys are a huge success story. I think Preston once told me your father was out in Fauquier when you were raised in the old kind of the Gum Springs neighborhood of South Alexandria, which is a historical black neighborhood. That seems such a long shot and such an amazing story. Um, do you think, that story that you guys have, is it more likely to happen then when you guys did it or now? Is it easier for people to rise and to do the things you guys have done in 2024? Or do you think in some ways it was easier then? We still had some of the affirmative action programs, some of the momentum we had from the 60s and 70s was still there, even though that was during the Reagan years. But do you guys think those things that you accomplished could be easier accomplished now or back when you guys did it?
You want to take that, David, or you want me to start?
Oh, oh, I mean, I look at growing up in Gum Springs and then being around that group of people as my support base. And so, from that basis, I felt that I was very well prepared coming out of Gum Springs to enter elementary school. We went to Head Start together. That when I got to elementary school in Fairfax County, I thought I was ahead. So in that sense, the level of preparation that I had to be successful was laid, the foundations were laid in my neighborhood. The smartest people that I came across were in my neighborhood. I mean, my mom, oh my gosh. My mentors would be the Carters in Gum Springs, just tremendously intelligent. And so when I walked out of my neighborhood, I walked honestly away from the smartest people that I would encounter that day. And so it's hard for me to say. Yes, I would definitely say that by the time, say in the 1980s, where finally there was a trickle down with respect to the affirmative action programs that, people really, really in the previous generation got access to. I'd say that then I come along and I benefit from the fact that the people in the previous generation were there to mentor me. And so I would say I benefited from the mentorship of those people, and then I was well prepared to move forward from there.
Yeah.
And
Preston,
I would say, oh, in my case, I mean, I can certainly say that like I got supports that may be much more difficult to get now because when we were coming up, I mean, the Head Start program was really in its infancy. It was like 5 years. It'd been in 5 years in existence. And in my case, I mean, we both got a lot of help. And in my case, I got like speech therapy, like a lot of therapy um, through Head Start, and just a lot of interventions that were very, very helpful. And, and our family as well, like mom, granddaddy and grandma, it was all like all hands on deck, really, I think and then supporting us. So I think that, yeah, I think that then with those resources that were in place, that were there to help us, I think it was certainly helpful in a way that may be much more difficult now.
well, you talk about this leadership and the Head Start program that you had in I guess it was Gum Springs, right? Is that what the neighborhood you guys were from? So my father moved to DC in 72 or 71 when he retired from the military. Actually, uh, he was stationed, his last military assignment was in DC. And when you came to DC, it was a time when they were building all these subdivisions. So you had a chance to move to Prince George's County. A lot of middle class military African Americans were moving to Prince George's County. Um, Fairfax, it wasn't a place where a lot of folks were going, but I guess in the historical black neighborhoods, a person like my father probably didn't even really know about him. He's come from out of town. He was talking to other military guys. So you tend to go right to the same kind of ready-made communities that were just, the urban sprawl or whatever you call it, the suburban sprawl, I guess. We lived in Lake Braddock first, and then we moved out to Fairfax. So the thought leadership that you're talking about that was in Gum Springs, who were these people? Were they doctors and were they lawyers from their historical families that were from Gum Springs?
Well, I think, would we say that Lewis Carter was the mayor, David?
Yep.
Yeah. Like our like really the one of the people who was really, really helpful for us was Lewis Carter. And the Carters were one of the major families in Gum Springs, and Lewis was a contemporary of my mom's. And he really did take the two of us under his wing, and when we had questions about life or about what was going on in the world, he was certainly a person that we could go to and talk and hang out and talk about sports, and of course his love for the Celtics, which we try to forgive him for that, but there was certainly but yeah, I think that like Lewis, I would say was one of those people.
Yeah.
I would say
David,
that when we were there, it was mostly working class,
Yeah.
uh, definitely working class. At the same time, there were it really it's a really long history. The history of Gum Springs is really going back to 1799 with the death of George Washington and the freeing of the slaves from his plantation, who then moved to that area in Gum Springs along Route 1. And so when you look at like some of the street names of people or some of the people who come from there, they're pretty illustrious. You're looking at not only connections between Gum Springs, but you're also looking at connections to Arlington House and just outside DC. And so you have really pillars of the Black community that established a lot of the Black community in and around Alexandria, as well as in Washington, D.C., because you also have the Syphax family. You also have the Carters at Arlington House, and the Carters at Arlington House are cousins of the Carters in George Washington's Mount Vernon. And so, when you look at the history of these people, I think that definitely, builds a foundation. I think that we were able to tap into that. And in terms of coming into contact with folks like Lewis Carter, Vincent Carter, Brunel Carter, and all these other folks that were just so influential for us, that they provided a firm foundation for my brother and I to succeed, among other people, but just starting off.
And the Black families in Gum Springs and southern part of Alexandria were completely separate from the historical Black families from like the Old Town area of I forgot what the Black neighborhood's called, but the Old Town area of Alexandria. The families have no relation, or are they part of the same?
They're tremendously connected, tremendously connected. So, we country folks down in Gum Springs, we referred to the people who lived in Alexandria as people who lived in town.
In town. Oh,
In
yeah.
town. You're going in town. So those people, if I didn't know them, my mother knew people. So our grandparents moved in from North Carolina and Georgia into the Fort Ward neighborhood in Alexandria, Virginia. And so they moved there roughly in the 1930s. And so that connects into a lot of people who ultimately went to T.C. Williams and those folks. And so in many ways, a lot of our families in Gum Springs and then in town are connected, and they've been connected for generations.
Yeah, we used to joke about how we were all related, right?
Yeah.
Can't date anybody because they're all cousins, right?
Yeah. Well, they all refer to folks as cousins. Now, you guys are both very good athletes. You also hear at some schools, when we were young, if you're an athletic male, that there was pressure not to be kind of a nerd or an egghead and not to really, even if you're good in school, you didn't talk about it much. You just kind of did it kind of like, oh, excuse me, on the side. Is there an element of that in your community as well?
It's interesting. I mean, like I was the older one, and I definitely was an egghead, and I mean, I definitely, and there was some teasing, but when I look back, it was definitely good natured, right? I think about Punkin Funderburk and all those guys who used to give
Yeah.
us grief, but but as I said, it was really, really all in good fun, and yeah, and I also think that. Because I was thinking about like this question, like, who were our mentors, right? And, when I was growing up, it was like trying to figure out who, you know, like it was like, how could I do these things? And so one book, that I picked up, which really kind of helped me with the mentoring was Second Wind, The Memoirs of an Opinionated Man by Bill Russell.
Yeah.
And I read that like the Bible. I just read that was my Bible, right? I mean, I read that because, Russell was a nerd. Russell hung out at the library. He hung out at the library, played basketball, was just a very cerebral person. And for me, it was like, here's somebody who could do these things. And so David had to hear me talk about Bill Russell all the time, right?
Well, I was connected to that book as well. I read that book, and he talked about Henry Christoph, and I had never heard of that
Yes,
name, and I really
yes.
hadn't heard much of it since, even though I've come across some old interviews with James Earl Jones because he was gonna portray Henry Christoph. He was a black leader in Haiti, one of the first black leaders in the New World, and so Bill Russell talked about him a lot in his book, and I remember reading it, and I read it too. I thought that was a great book. I read it more than once.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
so it's interesting. When I interviewed Carl Racine, he couldn't believe I knew so much about Henry Christoph, and it was just because of the book Second Wind um, by Bill Russell. David, do you want to chime in on this one, or
Yeah, I'd say that I benefited from having Preston around. Bottom line,
yeah,
I mean, I was basically a bratty little brother in many ways.
Mm.
So I think definitely, honestly, I hid my intelligence a lot. I wasn't cool to be a nerd. I wanted to be liked. My brother in Gum Springs, Preston has two nicknames in Gum Springs. One nickname is Stone, like Stone. The other nickname is the Professor. And Preston has had that nickname, the Professor, since we were in elementary school. So that was, rather forecasting his future. And so, in that sense, I agree with you. During that period, it wasn't necessarily cool to be looked on as a nerd. Honestly, I might look at my kids now and I tell them that one, it's more cool to be that, and two, don't be afraid to be that. And
Yeah.
so that is one thing I communicate to people now is that, you know, trust me, ultimately, when it comes down to it, I hate to say it quite this way, nerds have a tremendous impact on the world. And I think you have to honor that.
Yeah. Did you feel your family in Fauquier County was much different than your family in Gum Springs? I like, for example, I had family in DC, lived in Northeast, and I had family in like Farmville, Virginia, and it wasn't lost on me that they were much different than me. Their friends were different, their school was different. We got along great, but they were different than me just because they grew up in a different environment than I did. Was it the same for you guys in Fauquier County?
I mean, I would say that our respective parents are country.
Oh yeah. Different country though.
The different one, the one's kind of Georgia, North Carolina country, and my dad and his family in Fauquier, they're mountain country,
Mountain, yeah, yeah.
hillbillies. And so in that sense, there was a union. I mean, there were some conflicts based on the type of country they are, but it wasn't like, looking at the city folks compared to the country folks. It was more like, the working class country folks coming out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and then from deep South Georgia, right, close to basically the Sea Islands, compared to the hillbillies in the Appalachian Mountains, who are basically hanging out hunting deer and muskrat stuff like that. Both groups did, but definitely the folks in the mountains did more.
And we certainly saw this like when we would go visit our dad. Because our dad was country. Hey son, how you doing there, son? Hey dad,
Oh,
how you doing?
Lord, I reckon, boy.
Lord, I reckon. Jesus Christ, And so he would just talk, so our dad was just really, really country, right? And he would just, and we would come and visit him because our parents had divorced a long time ago. We would come and visit him, and it would be a different world. And Dave, remember when he took us to the juke joint?
Oh my God, color purple. Beauty.
I hung out with my father at that juke joint a whole
Hold
multiple
on.
juke joints a whole lot of times. I'm looking at my dad. I'm like, Pee Wee, this is your cousin. I'm like, oh my God. Yeah.
Hmm.
So my dad, we call him Hillbilly Bear. You know the Hillbilly Bear? That's what my
Yeah.
dad sounded like.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Is there any chance you guys would have been professors today if you guys would have been raised in Fauquier County with your father?
I don't know.
It's hard to say. I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard to say, because Dad was really proud of us, right? He was definitely proud of us. And he cheered us on. You know, I do think that the resources, the specialized resources that we had, I think growing up in Gum Springs really did help us out. I really I really have to say that the Head Start program was the I think the tool that really I think prepared both of us really to really put us in the right space where we could get to where we were going to go.
And I'll also say that not only Head Start, but being in Fairfax County Public Schools
Public schools
and the
definitely.
school district we were in was just about the top school district in the nation at that time.
Right.
But we were going to school. I think they had the SRA scores. I think the school that we went to had one of the highest, if not the highest in the nation, Stratford Landing Elementary. And so, we were both Preston and I were competitive academically there. And so, when we were in school, we were in classes, we were doing well, and we had access to resources in terms of that, you know, competition with students, if you will. And I think we thrived in that environment.
Right. And I also think that, and I also think that, I think we learned as well from that time really to speak up for ourselves. We had to speak up for ourselves at different times when, and I'm being upfront about this, that there were times when I know in my case where I could have been tracked into lower tracks, and my family, my mom, teachers really did look out for us when those times happened. I think so. I think that I wanted to say that while we did have a lot of good training and opportunities there, we also had to advocate for ourselves in order to get there. And I think that that was, and I do think that that was kind of like the preparation that we got from people like Lewis and other people who were really looking out for us, that our family, at various times spoke out in order to make sure that we could benefit from the resources that were there.
Well, at Robinson, we had a historical black neighborhood, Zion Drive. There's a famous church there. You guys might have been there at some point for a funeral or something, but it was much smaller than Gum Springs. It was more country because Fairfax was more country than Gum Springs would have been for the historical black neighborhood. And then you had middle class government workers and army guys like my family that was there. So we were friends with the black kids that were from the historical black neighborhoods. But they kind of kept separate than most of the white kids at Robinson. Robinson was, probably 96% white at the time, 95%. Um, and it was different. What about Fort Hunt? Fort Hunt is an interesting mix because it's got very wealthy housing, and but you also have some working class housing as well, not as much as probably some of the neighborhoods. So it was an interesting mix. So what was the dynamic at Fort Hunt for black students from Gum Springs?
Mm.
Mm.
Uh, hey, Preston, you want to take that one?
Okay, well, I'll turn you. It's interesting because like when I had alluded to the sort of having to fight for opportunities, you know, it was sort of like we were, we would go on the bus, right? We would go on the bus, and then when we would get off the bus, a lot of times I didn't, when I was in class, I didn't see my homeboys until we got back on the bus again.
Because you were taking more
Because,
advanced classes, or
well,
because you were
because
taking.
yeah, because I was just in these advanced classes, right? I mean, I was sort of like in the college track. But there was a little bit of that, so there was, and that's what I was referring to about the need at times at various points to speak out to make sure that we were where we were. And I always tell this story. I'll be honest, I always tell this story that it was, you remember Jerome Byers, David? You remember Jerome? So Jerome and I were in the same class together. And we called ourselves, Jerome was black. We called ourselves one and two. I was one and Jerome was two. And, hey, one, hey, two, what's up, man? And then two left, he left. And so for a long time, I was like it in my classes. And, it was like, and it took some time to really kind of get used to that. I mean, there were some experiences where I had to, where it was like an out of body experience. I mean, I always tell the story about for when I was a junior in high school, my for so a social studies teacher, Marvin Hubert. I was good friends and wonderful man. He wanted to show the birth of a nation to the
Oh,
class,
God.
birth of a nation. And he asked me if it would be okay. He asked me, I want to show this. Are you okay? Think it's people need to understand what's going on. Are you okay with that? Okay. I said, sure. And so, sitting here so those are the types of, experiences that I had. And so I always say that I got a wonderful education there, and it was really good training for kind of like the experiences that I had afterward, because it was just, it's just like there were these things that were going on. It was like, how do you deal and how do you thrive, right? And how do you thrive, how do you survive? And I always say that those experiences in Fort Hunt, for good and for ill, are really what helped prepare me for the career that I have now.
And the basketball team probably helped you um, connect with the black students at Fort because there was obviously some Fort Hunt had some great football and basketball teams back in those days.
Right. It definitely did help. There were like, again, like, in the Springs where we grew up, we were both playing with all of them, right? And so, so we were playing with them, and then, we were playing with them on a team like Willie McCallum, Los, Carlos
Yeah,
Martin, all those guys, right? And they were on the team. And so, yeah, so that was really the opportunity where, we're all homeboys, we're all close, and I mean, some of those bus rides were hilarious.
Los.
Oh
How did
man.
Los end up going to George Washington for ninth grade if he lived in Gum Springs?
What's
I think he
this?
lived in town.
What's that?
Lois lived in town.
Those lived in
Okay,
town. And yeah, and so I think was it 10th grade when he came to, it was 10th
it
grade
was
when he
10th grade
came,
because in ninth grade I played against him. He played at George Washington.
Yep.
right. Yeah. And of course, like Los, Los and I, sometimes people got us confused, because we look kind of alike, but Los was much better, you know.
He was much bigger. He was much bigger. He's a much bigger
Not a
guy.
small kid. No, Lois was not small.
Los is that, well, we're about the same size. We were about the same size, but yeah, and we both wear glasses, but Los is definitely better. But yeah, that's how we got, and the basketball team and the football, even it was a very, very interesting group because you had the folks from the Springs, you had people from Fort Hunt, and it's definitely an interesting melting pot, those teams. And I
Yeah.
would say that was probably the same for football too, wasn't it?
Yeah. And David, you saw the transition from Fort Hunt to West Potomac, which was a combination of Grovetown, which had more black students than Fort Hunt would have had, and I think slightly different neighborhoods probably as well. Even though some of Gum Springs probably went to Grovetown, so you probably got two different experiences in terms of the social life in high school.
Yes. Direct answer is yes. On the one hand, the kids, black kids who went to Groveton, I knew a lot of them already because we had played sports together.
Were they Gum Springs? Were they Gum Springs also? Or were they from another neighborhood in Grove the
Oh,
Grove together?
when you say
All
Gum,
Route One,
it's
right?
Route One,
Right,
Yeah, it's just Route One.
right?
right.
So we pretty much knew each other already.
Yeah.
We played Fort Hunt, Little League, and those guys played Bucknell. I mean, you knew each other there. So our families knew each other. So, for example, my best friend who went to Groveton, Cornell Grayson, like
Yeah.
my cousins, like and his cousins went to school together, right? There are a lot of people. Like my dad was friends with the people. My dad moved to Arlington and grew up in Arlington. My dad knew all those people in Arlington and Green Valley. And so when we were playing teams like in Wakefield and things like that, uh, my dad and his friends would get together and talk about their respective kids competing against the kids from Fort Hunt and West Potomac. And so I would say all these communities were interconnected to a great, all the black communities were interconnected to a great extent. And so when West Potomac and, Fort Hunt and Groveton merged into West Potomac, a lot of the black kids already knew each other. A lot of the working class black kids already knew each other, I should say. And so in many ways, we were just brought back together again based on our experiences before that when we grew up.
Yeah.
And those were some talented teams, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially yeah, especially when it first combined. So David, when you're at West Potomac, you played for Coach Meyer, I believe. Is that correct, David? And
Correct.
who was the track coach at West Potomac?
Ultimately, Actually, two, but one I'm going to focus on is Inez Skinner Bryant. She came in my senior year.
Okay.
So I
So
only had her as a track coach for 1 year.
yeah, was that a good transition for you? Was it better for your athletic career at the schools combined?
Yeah, I'd say so. On one end, honestly, my dream in high school football was to play for Frank Cornetti. Tremendous guy,
But he
tremendous.
left and he went to West Springfield, right?
Went to West Springfield, right? He was a Fort Hunt, went to West Springfield. I've got so many gifts from that guy that I can't ever pay him back. He would never ask me to pay him back, but I just got so much from Mr. Cornetti. So that said, West Potomac open, and it was big school, um, a lot of competition, but
Can
fun.
I chime in on that? I mean, I always remember thinking about, I remember because I used to watch David, all those teams perform from college. And I remember thinking like watching Fort Hunt and Groveton and thinking like, because all that Route One talent was really kind of divided up into two schools. And so I remember thinking about like, how good would those schools be, right? Because they remember, we used to talk about this. Remember, think about like basketball, Gary Ford, who was probably the best player I saw on Route One, and you had Ricky Alston, our cousin at Fort Hunt, and they were in different schools, right? And so you used to think like, what would that be like if they were on the same team?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, what would those teams have been like? With Mackey from Groton, all those guys. I mean, I think they could have competed. Like, and so I think that when those two schools combined, in those early years, there were some bomb squads in
Well, I
football.
would even add on top of that, Hyper Valley, right?
I
They went to
thought
Mount Vernon.
there were some bomb
They
squads
went
out
to Mount Vernon.
there. Right.
And so you had another group of kids that went to Mount Vernon. But when we went home, we all saw each other, right? And I would say that overall, I said this to people at Boston University. I said, I played with better athletes in high school than I did in college. And it's not a slant against the people that I played with in college. It was just the level of athleticism of the people that I came across was just crazy.
Yeah. What did you learn from Danny Meyer? I interviewed him, and he was an incredible guy. And I mean, what he did with Robinson as a principal was amazing. But I mean, look at how his state titles he's won and regional titles. Why is Danny Meyer in your mind such a great coach?
I think that it goes beyond coaching, right? You look at leadership in terms of blending like two schools that are coming together at a time that wasn't the easiest period. And so with respect to that, I think Dan Meyer was a catalyst for having that merger be successful. So so there's a lot of focus on, I don't know, branding is rather cynical, but that's the best thing I can say. It's like the tradition. I'm not the only one who said that. The tradition starts now, right? In other words, that kind of wipes away whatever happens before then, and now we're moving forward. And that was a simple way of directing people of where we're going to be looking for in the future. Plus, two, Dan Meyer is really a what's his gosh, Lou Holtz. You hear
He played for Lou Holtz.
play for Lou Holtz. And so, we all joke around about these sayings that Dan Meyer had when we played football, but they're all coming from Lou Holtz. Like, instead of getting cursed out, if you said, God bless America, you were in trouble.
You're in trouble.
Right? That's that type. God bless America, good Lord. But that said, I say to my son things that Dan Meyer said to us: do the little things right, the big things take care of themselves, right? Don't focus on trying to become this guy who's the best at everything now. Just do everything you need to do day by day, and you get there. And so I say that to my kid now, especially with a lot of kids who see a lot of social media stuff and they think, oh, this person's good now. I'm like, no, you got to work. This doesn't come that easy. So that's just a quick example.
Yeah. So Preston, so you go to UVA, and I meet you pretty quickly in the gym. Um, what was UVA like for you in your eyes, coming from Fort Hunt? You know, similar demographic than UVA, because when
Well,
me and you went to UVA, it was 10% black.
Right. Well,
Um,
I'll tell you a story though. It's funny because like while UVA was, you know, I even though I was called a professor, I still had a hard time picturing myself, you know, college was still something that was an abstraction for me. It was something that I was having a hard time picturing. So before I even got to UVA, like Dave is laughing right now. When I had gotten into, and my mom had to nag me to apply, and then I hadn't applied, and then she's like, and at the time of the application, you had to like put in your interest, like I want to apply, and I finally said to mom, "Hey, mom, I want to apply." And she said, "Son, I already did." You know, you're going to get the personal statement and you're going to do a good job on it, aren't you, son? Yes, mom, I'm going to do a good job. And so, so I did that. Then I got in, and then I wasn't even I had not even gone on to campus. I didn't step foot on the grounds.
grounds. Yeah.
And my French and my Spanish teacher, Monsieur Craig and Senor Hernandez, said, Green, there's just no way that you're going to just go to this university without stepping foot on the campus. So what they did was they took me. They had a foreign language conference, and they put me in the car and they drove me down there with them to UVA, and they just said, "You're gonna just walk around, just walk around campus, Preston. Be back here in 6 hours, and we'll pick you up." So I'm just walking around, I'm just walking around the ground. And then I go, then I go to I didn't know what to do. I was a library kid. So what do you do? So I went to the library. I go to Stacks and I pick up a book on the Peloponnesian Wars. There was a statue of Homer right now. And I'm sitting there reading this. This is what you do in college, right? And so, so that was my preparation to going to UVA. So that I get there and it's like, oh man, what have I gotten into? But then I realized that that was okay. It was, I was prepared. I was prepared academically. I felt comfortable. Um, and I think the other thing that really helped me at UVA was that, I found mentors. I found really my lifelong mentor there, Father Joseph Brown, who was the Dean of the Office of African American Affairs when I was there. And, and so I became one of his acolytes. And so, a bunch of us became like, would go there and, he was like our mentor, right? And so we would just go there and talk about life and about like life after college. And he had these sayings like, you have to define the terms of your existence, and, you have to tell your story. And so, it was through those experiences that UVA became, that I, that I was able to really benefit from it because I began to think about I found the supports really
Mm.
that I had at UVA. So yeah, it was a really eye-opening experience. I got to see like how the academic world worked. So it was it was a lot of preparation. Also, I even rushed for a week. You know, I even rushed through. I'm a teetotaler. I don't do it. I didn't know anything about Greek life. I didn't know about, fraternities. And so I still, one of the experiences I had was I went to this fraternity and there was this one student. I remember he was a medical school student and he was smoking the biggest blunt I'd ever seen in my life. And he was like, he's talking. I'm sitting there talking to him, trying to strike a conversation. And I remember, saying to him as he was smoking his blunt, like, yeah, I just noticed there's not a lot of, diversity here. And he goes, oh yeah, that's right. The ethics have their own fraternities. It's like, oh, okay, I'm at UVA now,
Mm.
So it was just, it was just an incredible experience, though. The academics were great. You know, and you really got just learn how the academic world worked. And I think that um, the all of that training, both sort of like socially and academically, I felt was really, again, great preparation for what I ended up doing later in my life. So I look back in my years really, really, really fondly.
Well, President, did you feel like the black students there were like you from black neighborhoods, or they're different? Like I felt being a suburban guy, I felt a lot of the black students were from the city or from private schools or whatever. I felt they were cooler than I was being a suburb guy at first, and then after a while, after you're somewhere for a while, you get comfortable and you get less self-aware of what's going on. But at first, I felt that way. How did you feel?
I, I would, it's weird because I was a blurred. I look back at it and I think I was like I was a real blurred in that, you know, I it was funny because I played a lot of I played a lot of ball. Like that's how a lot of us met. We were
Yeah,
playing ball, but I lived in a with with um with white people in my, living in living space. So it was just sort of and I wasn't in a fraternity, I wasn't in fraternities. It was just and I was I felt that I was I had good friends, really. I had good friends. Um, but it was sort of like it was in my case, I think it was just this really, strange feeling because it wasn't even so much, I was just such an introvert, really, that it was, that I really just had very, very close friends and that, so I never really thought that I was in any really one group, if that makes any sense. I was sort of like here and I was there, but I didn't go to many parties. I spent way too much time on the basketball court, I think,
me too. Well, you feel
And
comfortable there. Basketball court's the
so
same
that
no
mean
matter
that
where you
was
go.
so, so it's sort of like I kind of floated around. I really, my time in college, I think, was really just sort of like being in this group and being in that group, but never really being in one specific group, if that makes any sense what I'm trying to say.
Oh, of course. Well, and David, I'm sure you didn't have time to worry about it much because when you're on sports teams, you have instant friends or at least people that you can hang with, and you're really busy. So it probably, in some ways, makes it easier to assimilate.
Um, no, in the sense that I was engineering,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
right?
You
So,
didn't have any time, man.
Yeah.
You didn't have no time.
in the sense that I was engineering, there were no other athletes or football players in the School of Engineering. So that said, my support group was my roommate, Reggie Howell, who went to TC and then graduated from Episcopal. He's African American. He was a systems engineering major, and a guy named Kelvin Hawkins.
Hmm.
He was an electrical engineer who was also on the football team too as well. And so they were my support group. Plus two, I think that Boston University didn't realize how to get it right, but they got it right in the sense that my academic advisor was the associate dean of the School of Engineering. He took me on. Dean Thomas Kerr, the associate dean of the School of Engineering, was my academic advisor, and I met with him every semester to choose classes. And then, of course, if I meet with him, say during the week, we would discuss a football game and how well I did. Oh, I saw you out there. Da, da, da. So we would have these conversations. How's school going? Da, da. So now I see programs at universities where they have much better mentoring within the actual schools that the athletes are in. And just by way of how things happen at Boston University, in terms of my rareness in the School of Engineering and Reggie's rareness and then Kelvin's rareness is that we were all advised by the associate dean of the School of Engineering, and that definitely helped us to go through our programs at Boston University.
How important were track and football to you? I mean, how important was it a focus? Were you really worried about your success, or were you more concerned about doing well enough, keep your scholarship so you can just study and become an engineer?
I wanted to be good at all of them.
Yeah,
I wanted to excel at all of them. Reality is that there are 24 hours in a day.
yeah,
You
yeah.
can be honest with you. So track wise, I lettered. Uh, you know, honestly, if I had assessed my skills, then honestly, track was the way to go for me because I was a high school All-American in track. A lot of the guys that I competed against and beat in high school, many of those guys went to the Olympics. And, I just have to take the responsibility for the decisions that I made. That said, I learned a lot about myself. Boston University, honestly, was the best choice for me in terms of where I was, what I got access to, what I learned about myself, and what I learned about the world.
Yeah.
And so, if I had it all over to do again, I'd probably do the
You'd have
same.
won the 800.
Huh?
You would have won the 800,
No,
man.
man. No, dog. No. I would have stuck to
What?
1 4. I was all right. I wouldn't. No, I'm not running 800. But basically, I learned a lot about life, to be completely honest with you, and I think that's what Boston University was definitely good for me.
Well, Preston mentioned earlier Bill Russell, who had a very up and down relationship with Bostonians. And he was very, I guess at one point he didn't want his number retired or something, or he didn't want to go in the Hall of Fame with Boston. I forgot what it was. And it's interesting because he had such a great career as a player and also the first African American coach in the NBA. But he had a funny relationship with people who live in Boston. How about you? Did you find there were any different than anywhere else, or being in a university, it's different than living in Boston.
David, remember when it was open season that time when that
Oh
remember
yeah.
that? Oh,
Um, I'm trying to get everything organized to kick it back to you. It was an interesting experience. On the one hand, there's me up there. I'm young, football player, smart. Uh, you know, when I went out, I had a good time. Uh, I say it straight, dating wise, it was, I mean, but then again, there's certain places, certain communities that you shouldn't go to. You need to be careful about that, right? And
Yeah.
so knowing that you had to know that, you had to know the lay of the land. Definitely, I think when Charles Stewart is it that when he killed his wife and they said that an African American person did it, the best phone call that I got was from my mother.
oh
And
man.
she called up there and she told me, and actually, I was coming back from studying, and my best friend, Harold Thomas, was in his room, and my mom couldn't get me because I wasn't back. So Harold was next door to me. Harold played football as well. She called Harold. Harold picked up the phone and she told Harold and me, do not go outside tonight because she knew what was going to happen, which that police were arresting pretty much, honestly, any black or brown person on the street that they could.
Wow.
And so I didn't go out that night. And that was the best phone call that I got. And
It was
so
crazy.
a lot of my friends who are on the football team or just walking back from study hall, they did get stopped. Sadly, honestly, some of those people got strip searched. It was crazy. And so, it definitely was an interesting time in terms of like coming out of the South, right? Because, I'm coming into these different groups, right? So it's not just traditional Southern black, white type of thing. Now I'm in a group where you've got the Irish, you've got the Polish, you've got the Italians, you've got the African Americans, and then the African Americans, you've got the Cape Verdeans, you've got all these different groups of people, right? You're coming across, and they all have a different story, and they all contribute to a different fabric to the city. But definitely, knowing when situations like the Charles Stewart case occurred, that, we really had to be careful about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So,
Wow.
yeah.
It's kind of scary stuff. And UVA went through some of that stuff the last 8, 9 years as well. But it's gotten much better with the was it Trayvon Martin situation as well. Well, I want to talk a little bit about you guys' lives in academia. I mean, you guys both have this incredible career as professors, and you get to live your life with students and your research, things that I would find fascinating. Um, when you look at your tract and your credentials, are is has the track changed now? Like if kids want to become professors, if they want to get into academia, is it still, would you advise them to do so? Is it still a good career, or are you guys concerned about the future? From what I hear, I'm not sure if it's true, professors are working much longer hours and making less money now, but I'm not sure that's true. But do you worry about um, you know, students who want to become professors and spend their lives in academia?
It is, I think the timing for us was very good because, we're both tenured. There's in in academia now is moving away from that. You don't have as many tenured professors now. For professors on tenure track, you've got a lot of people who are fixed term. You've got a lot of these, other sorts of arrangements. And, and there are really fewer opportunities. So you definitely do have people who are getting PhDs and wanting to go teach in universities, and the spots are just not there. So, it really is difficult. Now, of course, there are still things that one can do with these degrees, right? And I think that we need to be thinking more about, you can certainly go into industry, you can certainly do a lot more things outside of academia. So, we definitely need to be thinking about that. But I still maintain if you can get it, it's a great job.
Right.
It's a great job. There's a lot of, you know, you have freedom to pursue what you have freedom to pursue your rabbit holes, yeah, free. I mean, and there's a lot of just intellectual. I mean, even now, there's still a lot of, we're being paid to think. We're being paid to think. We're being paid to think about things, write about things, try to be useful with what we do. And, I swear by the job. I love it.
Yeah.
Every day I wake up, I'm just thinking, wow, I'm just, I'm so thrilled that I get to think about this. And I'm thinking about billable hours, like a lot of my friends in law school who, don't make as much money as they do, mind you. But I mean, but there's something to be said about that freedom of time, about that academia does provide that I just love.
And you're so happy they can pay you much less. I hope they don't watch this podcast, huh? So Dave, what about you? Like Preston, do you feel like you found your calling and you've been happy in academia?
Well, I think Preston, as I said before, his nickname was a professor, right? So
Right.
if you were to like tell me like somebody I met who would be a professor, it would be my brother. Me, I call myself the accidental professor. What happened was my advisor, Michael Harris at University of Maryland, he's an African American professor. I mean, I just didn't know any better, to be completely honest with you. So at Maryland, I started in his research group, and he said, "You know what? I think you should be a professor." And I laughed at him, right? So I was like, "There is no way I want to do your job." But as I kept going through, I kept on getting feedback from other people saying the same things, that you should actually think about doing this. And so by the time I graduated with my PhD, I thought I maybe I should do this. And so I did a postdoc, right? And then I didn't know that University of Minnesota was the top school in chemical engineering because I met a professor, Alan McCormick, who said to me, "Hey, I gave a great talk at a conference," and he said, "Hey, if you ever want a postdoc, you can postdoc with me." So, I'm thinking like, oh man, Minnesota's cold. I don't know about that, right? So I go up to Minnesota. I mean, you say it was a top school for chemical engineering in the nation. Okay, but I'm one of the top people there, right? And so, and I'm a kid in a candy shop. I get access to, top minds. I get access to the top research facilities. I'm in there all the time. I mean, I'm cranking out papers. I'm writing stuff. I apply for another postdoctoral fellowship. I go to Belgium, and that gets funded, and then I get a job at UVA. And so, you know, I love what I do. I love students, right? I love interacting with students. I love pursuing cutting edge, state of the art things that hopefully impact our ability to do things better in engineering, make life better too. And so, in that sense, I think ultimately I found my calling by trying a lot of different things and ultimately getting there. But that's the path that I needed to take.
There's one thing I wanted to add in on this because, like, I think about, we're talking about this, and I think about mom, right? Because like our mom fought really hard, and I remember something that she said to me, when I remember, and I'm trying to try not to tear up, because when I talk about this, but
Yeah.
because I don't want to get all, I don't want to get all start bawling, right?
I can
But
edit it out.
yeah, okay, well, please do that. But but one time, she said to me, Preston, you and David are you are my dream. You two are my dream.
Wow.
And I said, what do you mean, Mom? What do you mean by that? And Mom told me the story about, she was watching, she was watching the March on Washington, and Martin Luther King was saying, hey, about like his having a dream. And you have to say, my mom was 13 years old. My mom was 13 at the time. And
Oh,
when she was talking about having a dream. And she said that she would hope that one day that her kids, her dream was that one day her kids would get an education. That was her dream. Now, I think we overdid it. We definitely, we definitely, did this. So, but, so every time I think about this, I think about that, I think about this 13-year-old who talked about having this dream. And then, in the course of 6 years, she has two kids.
yeah,
She,
your mom is not much older than I am. I was shooting to do the math here. I'm
mom's,
like, yeah,
My
yeah,
mom
my
is
mom.
17 years older than Preston and 19 years older than me.
Right.
yeah.
So, so like, so we become this. And so, so I think about that and I think about, wow, yeah, Catherine did all right. But unfortunately for mom, one of the things is she has to listen to us call her about what we're working on. So, she has to listen to me talk about substantive due process and school choice and all this stuff. And then she has to listen to David talk about polymer melts. And, and after a while, mom is like, I don't mean no harm, son. I don't mean no harm, but I got sleep, So she's like, you two gotta let me rest. So, she's sometimes you have to be careful of what you wish for, because when we call her and start talking about what we're up to.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you guys, we hear about, these comedians will complain. It's to me first world problems, but they go to college campuses and they swear that they don't have freedom of speech anymore. They get shouted down. Is this really a thing where people in college can't express themselves if a if a speaker wants to discuss anything controversial, he won't be allowed? When you hear these things on TV, is there any truth to them?
It's, it's tough. It is certainly tough because, I teach. The thing is that, I teach about race and law and funding. I mean, basically, I teach about things that I probably couldn't, some of my research might be banned in some of these places, right? And so, It is, it is definitely very difficult right now. It is definitely, it's definitely difficult. It's hard for it's hard to really balance kind of like how to talk about these things because there's a lot of raw feeling about this. And so we do have to think about how to I think about it in my work and then like how to talk about these things in ways that we can have these conversations and and deal with diversity of thought and also deal with the problems at hand. Because
Yeah.
again, I talk about educational disparities, I talk about discrimination, I talk about funding disparities, I talk about, I'm talking about, and that's a history, history of funding disparities is a history of racism in
Yeah.
this country. So, so I have to talk about those things, but then, but in a way that that can be accessible. So there is, I mean, there is that trick and that struggle about how to do that. And and universities are really having a hard time. They're really having a hard time doing this. And the next few years is going to be really tough, navigating these waters and finding ways to talk about these issues in a really, really fraught environment. Much more, much more, I didn't grow up in the 60s. I didn't go to college in the 60s. I didn't go to college in the 70s, so I really can't speak to that. But it certainly is something that we are all trying to figure out how to navigate.
Yeah. David, my favorite podcast is it's called The Rest is Politics. I'm not sure if you watch it. It's Rory Stewart.
I watched the rest of, yes,
I
famous.
love it. It's Alistair, what's his last name? And Rory Stewart. Anyway, Alistair was Tony Blair's consultant. But anyway, they had Angela Merkel on the other day, and she's a fascinating woman. And her father actually moved behind the Berlin Wall, behind the Iron Curtain, and because he was some kind of minister, and so she was raised there. So when Berlin Wall fell, she got into politics, and she was like made for politics. It was great. So I think Rory asked her, well, why did you wait so long to get into politics, or why now, why then? And she said, well, when you grew up in communism, they can't change the way engineering works. You can't change math. You can't change things. So I had a field for that. That's why I was an engineer. But later on, when politics is something I gravitated to, and it was different because we felt free. Is there a part of you that you're immune for some of the politics and some of the hot buttons issues because you're in engineering?
Yeah, we don't come across those issues in terms of the frontline student world interaction. So I won't say that we do. At the same time, what I would say is that my observation, going back to growing up in Gum Springs, was that Gum Springs every day was a history lesson, right? That there was not only American history, but there was this other side of the history with respect to like Mount Vernon and nation building that we got immersed in every day in Gum Springs. And so it was the other side of that history. And so now when I come across students, I'm encouraged. I think, these students are hip, man. I'm like, dang, that's all right, right? And so we come across these students, they're coming across the information that I got they're getting a little bit more of the information that I got living in Gum Springs. And I think by being in much more diverse environments that they're in, they actually are able to navigate them a little bit better than, say, people going back in the 1980s, 1990s. And so that's something I observe. And when I hear the discussions and arguments, I'm wondering if that is a friction point, right? Because I see that at UVA with respect to its board of visitors, right? But now I see it interacting now with the students, right? Where that friction is coming, at the highest level of leadership at UVA, but also at the highest level of leadership in terms of student governance, right? Instead of student leadership. And so that is, I think, a very interesting friction point. Personally, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds, but all I will say is that those kids will be leaders in the future,
Yeah.
right? And so, in that sense, personally, I'm encouraged.
Do we have, well, that's good. Do we have anything to worry about when you hear about politicians talking about higher education, the need to tinker with the curriculums, especially the history that is taught? They want to get involved in dealing with student protesters. Is there real concern about the federal government getting involved at universities?
I had to push that one to Preston. Yeah, man.
Oh, oh man, you cold, man.
I can't answer that question, man. It's you, dog.
You're just busy in the lab, right?
Yes. I'm like,
I'm huckabucking too, but
yeah.
I do think that, look, I mean, they're definitely, universities are under pressure right now, right? And there's certainly, there are concerns about the the utility of universities. The we definitely do see the studies that are finding that more and more people are having doubts about higher education. They're wondering about the utility of higher education. Now, of course, I'm biased. I do obviously think that there is utility in higher ed. I do think that there definitely is that usefulness. And it definitely does prepare you, I think, if done correctly, for, life in the world and, being learners and also being productive. I think that both things are true. I do think that we're going to have to do a, we're going to have to be, I think, going forward, do a much better job explaining that importance. I think that a lot of the times we do take it for granted that that yes, it's obvious that if you learn these things, that this can be helpful. But I think a lot of people don't see that. So we're going to have to do a very good job, a much better job, I think, of articulating what the benefits are.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like to think that I'm trying to do my best. I think, all of us academics do take these things seriously. We do take these things seriously. We want to be useful. We want, and so I think that, that's certainly going to be a challenge, and I hope and I do believe that we're up to it.
But like, if you look at like West Virginia University, and I don't want to pick on it, um, but they did away with a lot of their foreign language majors. With budget cutting, they got rid of. It's almost, a higher level type of trade school. The
Right.
trades where you can get jobs the easiest, or the majors that they're going to fund going forward. Some of the schools in the state have closed, and again, I don't want to pick on West Virginia, but I
Right.
think it's a kind of a microcosm of what's going on in higher education.
Right.
The UVAs are getting more applications than ever. And then schools that are, at the middle, at the bottom are getting much fewer applicants who want to go there. So it's almost what you're talking about. You have to explain the benefits, but I feel like the some of the colleges are going to radically change in the future. If this is a sign of what's to come.
It's very concerning. I mean, certainly like in a place like, these places is that if you don't have that higher education in place, then that can become brain drain, because people start going elsewhere, right, for those opportunities. So it's certainly, I would argue that it certainly makes sense to hire those higher education institutions because not only do they provide for learning, but they also provide for young people that provide them an opportunity to be there and to stay there. It's certainly great for, sustaining those communities. So, I mean, that's certainly very concerning to me because that can certainly be a case of brain drain because they just leave, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm not going to, I'm not a West Virginian, so I don't want to, I'm going to stay in my lane here, but I certainly am concerned about that. And I really do hope that we can, we can stop this, that universities do play a major role in the development of in the country. And I just hope that states take them more seriously.
Yeah. Well, thanks. And David, in engineering, is it less of a factor? Engineering programs aren't being cut nationwide, are they? Because those are programs where the graduates are able to get jobs
The
and they're effective
UVA
programs.
program and UVA's focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, so on and so forth. That's increased since I've been at UVA.
Mhm.
So I don't necessarily see that going away. At the same time, I would say that I think that what one strong thing about UVA School of Engineering is that they have a Department of Society and Technology integrated into the School of Engineering. And I think that it is tremendous to have people there who put the social side of engineering, because that really, in essence, is kind of what we do. We are designing things to make life better, right? And so there's some things that me focus on my technology may not consider the social and societal implications of that. And so I think it's critically important to have those people there who help to be thought leaders in that way. And so at the very least at UVA, what that does is it strengthens our grants that we write, right?
Okay.
That improves it because we're already thinking about what the societal implications of the technologies we develop are. At the same time, it also helps us provide education to engineers to make them more well-rounded. How do you develop technologies that, consider the fact that someone's skin color, you may not be adjusting for that properly, right? You may have some type of facial recognition software that might recognize your face, but then again, it may not adjust the hue properly, right? And so that you got to have all people in the room, right, when those designs are made. And so that's where I think that at the engineering side, there's been a greater discussion of that need over and above what has happened, say, over the first 100 years, over the 20th century, if you will, of engineering programs in the United States. Going forward, the 20th century, the 21st century has been more of a discussion of like what is the impact of these very technologies on many different people in society, right? Gender, race, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I, they all blend in, they all work together really to enable the society to work. Engineering and sociology, all those things come together to,
Absolutely.
you know, and they all matter. They are all important, they all matter, and we need to value them all.
How about AI? Is AI changing your guys' jobs yet? I mean, it's interesting. I interviewed a woman for the UVA Legends podcast, which you guys qualify for as well. But she was telling me how she teaches legal writing in a law school in New York, and she's really having her students embracing AI as a way to make the writing better, to write more quickly, to be more efficient. Just kind of when Preston and I discovered Westlaw and Lexis back in the early '90s. At first, we thought we had cheat codes,
Oh
and then
yeah.
it just it's everyone does it now. But is AI changing the way you teach, and is it going to affect higher ed the way you guys see it?
I think that is the struggle right now. It is going to affect, it already is affecting higher ed.
Mm.
I mean, students are using AI as writing tools. They're definitely using AI as writing tools. And we academics are having a hard time with that. I think that we're still trying to figure out how to use this as, as your podcaster was saying with legal writing. It can be a tool. It certainly can be a tool in the same way that a calculator is a tool, in the same way that, various sort of implements. You look at the history, you always find that anytime something happens, the generation before starts going, well, oh my goodness, that's the end of things as we know it, And so, it's like, not on my lawn, they all start rolling up the papers and now shaking their telephones and going, oh, now and that's happening now. I mean, we're in that stage right now where we're trying to figure out how to use it. And we're all it's really changing things. I think that one of the concerns that I have is that if we start using this as a tool, you still have to find ways of making sure that students are thinking as they're using it, that it can be a tool that can maybe speed up the process, but that there's thought, going along with that, with the student who's using it. Like take law, for instance. You always are seeing these instances where people are using AI to write briefs. And then it's just a real mess because one of the problems with AI is hallucination. These things make cases up, they make stuff up. And so so you can always read in these trade journals about instances where people are writing briefs and the judge is like, wait a second, where did that case come from? Oh, well, I didn't shepherdize that. That was you know, you know, I don't know where that came from. It was the AI system, ChatGPT, or whatever it was, making up the facts, making up the case. So I just use that to say that we're going to have to, as part of that, teaching that as a tool and making sure that, the human element, the thinking element is there in using that tool.
Yeah. Great. David, you have anything to add about AI?
I agree. I come at it from the perspective of my background. I worked for a company. I was a computer programmer slash systems engineer for a company that ultimately got bought up by Lockheed Martin for about 3 years. And also, as a grad student, I did research that, I mean, and pretty much you would call that data science now, right? In terms of the things that people do. And so, on the one hand, I hear what people say about AI and all the things it can do, and it reminds me of what I heard during the first internet boom and bust cycle, right, where it got oversold. And there's some things that AI can do well. AI handles repetitive tasks well. Um, are you going to let it make decisions for you? I don't think so. That's a bad thing. In terms of my students use it. And I don't tell people in terms of, they do a lot of math stuff, right? And I tell them, I say, look, you can go look whatever up that I gave you, but junk in is junk out. And so if you got something spitting junk back at you, you put that junk down, that's on you. So if you do that and I catch it, hey man, it's all fair, right?
Oh,
So
yeah, right.
you have to have the expertise to understand what is real and what is not real. And it takes time to build that up. I mean, this, so that's where I say, yes, in one end, in terms of the automation aspects that AI can provide, it definitely is enabling. But on
Mm.
the other end, in terms of the expertise to have the judgment on when to trust it and when not to trust it, that takes expertise. And that is what you pay for. And so that to me means you have to have people who have more expertise in their ability to judge the information and stuff is kicking back to them. And that's not trivial. That takes time to build.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, guys, I thought we'd end. We talk a lot about high school sports, obviously, and one thing that's been going on is, we've been struggling with what are transfer rules going to be, and what are the rules for parents choosing their public school, be it by moving into the district or any kind of pupil placement they may have in those situations. Well, I also think there's going to be a push to have more charter schools. Excuse me, there's going to be more money for private schools. So we're going to start getting more competition for private schools, for athletes and for students generally. When you guys think about these developments in the long term, and I know you guys are at the college level, but what do you think some of these changes are going to start doing academically? Do you think our public schools are going to be under threat? Or do you think the private schools are going to get more and more funding, and it's going to hurt our ability to educate the masses?
So
So,
I'm just going to start and just say, I'm kicking that to Preston. because that is what it's all about. Me, I can talk in general about the sports side of things, but go ahead,
Well,
Preston.
that's interesting too. But Preston can get started.
Which one do you want to take first? You want to take the sports first part first, or which
Uh,
part do you want to take?
I'll let you do whatever order you
Well, let's
want.
take the sports part first, because like, I don't live in Northern Virginia now, but I was watching with a whole lot of interest in what was going on with Hayfield, right? And and I was and we were joking about this, and you both of you guys totally sold me down the river, because when I was chatting, you're like, I don't think these guys like school choice.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because that's school choice. That's how school choice works.
Right.
Because what happens is that because everybody thinks that school choice is, if you study school choice, people think that people are making choices about academics. But when you look at it, they make choices for a whole lot of reasons. It could be about it could be, well, what school is the closest? Or, what's the best orchestra?
Hmm.
Or what is the best football team? This is this is how school choice works. So when people were making these decisions, this is a classic school choice principle. They were choosing the school they wanted to be because of some benefit that they wouldn't have in another school. And so I think that, when I was watching all the comments here, and I know they're going to yell at me, if they're going to start typing back at me, in those wonderful responses here. You'll probably put up was green full of, caca, or is he telling the truth here? But this is how that's going to work. You're going to see a lot more of that. You're going to see, as you have charter schools and vouchers, and as they come up more, you're going to see more and more schools recruiting and using, a charter to recruit someone for play sports, or you'll see, schools using vouchers to get the top talent in Route One. You're
Yeah.
going to see you're going to see a lot more of that. So just be prepared. That is basically the future as we start having school choice.
There are
So
two schools in Fairfax County. One's Bethel Academy. I believe he's religious. The other one's Gideon. They're basically schools of like 15, 20 people. And I think they do a lot of online stuff and they
it,
train basketball all day long.
there's a
Um,
lot of online. There's a lot of online. There's a lot of online charter schools. Just as an aside, there used to be a George Gervin charter school.
is there, well,
Yeah,
that
the
could be a
Iceman
school.
had a charter school, but yeah, I mean, but you do have a lot of, you do it like a lot of charter schools have talent.
Yeah.
They have basketball talent. I think the Brow, I think LA Laker, what's his name? AD. I think he was a charter school grad.
Yeah.
I used to go to I used to when I taught at Penn State, I used to go to a lot of those like high school games, championship games, and they're all like they're all charter schools. Some of them were all like, and these charter schools were bomb squads, and so the point I'm saying is that this is going to be a lot of recruiting through sports, and so as people are saying this, get used to this. This is just going to happen more and more and more.
And
Now,
Pennsylvania is one of those schools where the private schools play with the public schools. So
right.
it's,
Yeah. So, I used to, when I was at Penn State, I used to go to the championship games, and I would watch, state championship games. And I would watch all the state high schools, all the state high schools playing, and all the state Catholic schools from Philadelphia were there, on all that. So, yeah. So, yeah. I mean, so that's certainly, and I saw that discussed. So in the Virginia piece, like, wait, you have a Catholic school playing
yeah.
public school. In a lot of states, that's the norm.
Yeah.
That's just the sort of
I would
thing.
love it. Like in Ohio, the private schools get a handicap. So if their enrollment's like 500, they may play with public schools enrollment of 1,000. So it makes up for the fact that they can recruit a little bit, which that's kind of a creative way to do it. So uh, David has waded in a lot on the Hayfield issue. And for folks who don't know, Hayfield is a public school in Alexandria, Virginia, near where you guys grew up, a rival that had a new coach start this year, had won 2 state championships, and they had a load of transfers based on whoever, depends on who you're listening to. He recruited them all, or I think more accurately, people want their kids to play for him because he's got a record of producing great talent. Well, it's interesting. This weekend, Madison played against Oscar Smith. Oscar Smith is a team that's been great for many, many years. They have probably about 10 to 15 Division One prospects on their roster. And Madison may have 1 or 2 Division One prospects on the roster. And I mean, I'm sure people move into Madison to play baseball, especially or other sports because they're known for that. I don't necessarily know they necessarily move them for football, but they have an incredible program. And it's interesting because I think we had assumed that the only model that would work to win a state championship was to adopt the model of Oscar Smith or Maury or Hayfield, where you get a bunch of Division One prospects to move in and to play for these great coaches so you can compete against Division One prospects. Madison almost bucked the system yesterday. I was down there, one of the greatest sporting events I've ever seen. It's one of these games. It had Hail Marys. It had incredible fourth down conversions. It was just one of these games where you just couldn't take your eye off it. And we were deprived of an overtime, what I think was a questionable, unsportsmanlike conduct call on a celebration. But anyway, this is really coming to a head in that, and David, we've been arguing about this, but Madison almost bucked that trend and proven that a community team with incredible coaching, one amazing running back, Dominic Preisley, Preisley, yeah, and they almost beat them. So anyway, they almost bucked what's become the new trend.
So are you asking me what's become new trend?
Well, no, I was just kind of teeing that up that we had assumed that Hayfield was going to be the way of the future in terms of if you're going to win, you're going to have to get the big talent to come to the school like Hayfield with the great coach. Whereas Madison, basically a community team, almost bucked that trend yesterday and beat Oscar Smith.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I can't tell you I think Preston has hit the trend. But what I would say is that the way I approach it is that I look at what Hayfield is. And I think back to when I was a kid in the 1970s, seeing a lot of the kids on Route 1 being recruited. And it was open season. It was in mass.
Yeah.
So when I hear people say stuff like, oh, I've never seen this before. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh my God.
This has been going on over 50 years. And so, and more directly, I look at the situation with Hayfield, and I need to see, there's the inputs and the outputs, right? The inputs is what we're arguing about. The outputs at Hayfield in terms of Overton's program has been that a lot of these kids have gone on to schools and they've gotten their degrees.
Right.
Well, right there, right now, there is an alignment of incentives, right? There's alignment of sports and alignment of life. And in that case, what happens with that is that someone's program sells itself at that point because there is a quid pro quo. And so that's where I start looking at what happened like in the 70s. I mean, honestly, some of those kids that went to some of these schools, high school, not college, high schools, got used. And I talked to them and they'd tell me as I was coming through, watch out for certain things. And so that's when I look now at what that value statement is. And I was like, well, if I'm in this situation as a parent and my kid has the ability to compete at a D1 school, right? And then on top of that, now you talk about Power Four, and this is something I said before. These scholarship offers with before nil they're worth about $90,000 to $100,000 a year. Round that up, that's $500,000 over 4 years. And if you're a competitor for that, it just makes all the sense in the world to do that. And you need to have a person that helps you prepare for that. And it's great to have a person that helps you prepare for that. Now, I will say one thing. I will call Coach Granetti's mentorship of me to the highest of all highs because he told me that, yes, use this as an opportunity, right? Use this as an opportunity to better yourself, use this opportunity to get your education. And based on what I observe from Coach Overton and when I see the successes of the kids that go on to school, it sounds like something like that's being said here. So in that case, I mean, I don't know. I'm in Charlottesville. I don't know all the things that are happening, but that is just my observation. And so with that, I said that you're going to have a changing landscape. I think that one thing that Madison brings to the floor is that even though you have great talent still has to play together. Right. The best talented team I ever have served on was my high school team, and we lost to Mount Vernon. Right, we got our butts kicked by Mount Vernon next door.
Is that
right?
Mark Cottam? Mark Cottam and Tag in
I
Spicer?
forget Mark Cottam. I don't tell Mark he can go with it. Hey Mark, right? But I think Mark actually I think Mark blew out his knee. I think he was out by that time, right? Like Mark and I are really good friends.
Yeah.
But we talk again, guys at Mount Vernon, we all talk about this, right? And so you had on my high school team, I start naming Ed Shropshire, 6'7", 270, 4'5". Steve Griffith, 6'4", 250, 4'5", right? The whole backfield. I run 4'2". Recognize that.
4'2"?
I run 4'2".
Those
right?
are handheld, man. Handheld.
No. Don't. Hey, I'm 4'2", 4'3". Remember that, right? But Jay Moore. Now, I'll tell this to everybody. You play with Chris Warren and all those guys, right? I played against all those people. The best athlete I've ever seen, bar none, is Jay Moore. Crazy stuff, right? As a kid. So there's me, there's Ernie Lyles, number one running back for Notre Dame, 4'5". I mean, we have guys just falling out. I mean, the JV, they're talking about Hayfield killing the JV and freshman killing team. Man, West Potomac is just lying up. I mean, the JV team has nothing but guys who are juniors at West Potomac who can't get time on the football field because they got folks like me. And, I'm just like a notch above, but not that much. These guys are excellent. They're killing teams. I'm sorry, not four. Freshmen are just like blowing teams out. It's crazy. And so when I hear people say these things, I'm like, oh, I've seen that before. I saw it before with TC back in the 80s. I saw it before with us, right? And then the example with us, and Dan Meyer talks about this, is that you still have to play as a team. And that was a lesson that the kids in 1988 and 89 learned from and seeing the kids from 87 who was just talented beyond belief. Now, I'm not saying that Oscar Smith didn't have the talent, but still talent has to play together well. Yeah. And so that's what I'm saying is that, I give all the props in the world to Madison. They probably got that talented team too. Again, they've been a continuous powerhouse in Northern Virginia. And I got to give them just as much props. Bottom line, the game is played on the field. That's it.
I was going to say that
the world, but the game is played on the field.
The one thing I was going to say before moving on is that reminded me of I was following from again, this is way before my time. I was a kid. I was a 7-year-old, but in basketball, it was this was West Springfield against.
Oh, yeah.
This is the basketball equivalent. This is the football equivalent was West Springfield against Petersburg. This is Moses Malone versus Coach McCool and all those guys. I mean, this is the type of game that was, right? Where Madison almost pulled that off.
They did, and it's very interesting because in basketball, you can slow, especially because there's no shot clock. You can slow the tempo down. There's things you can do. Football, you have to play. You could maybe use much of the shot clock, but there's really nothing Madison can do to really slow the game down. They had to be willing to match play by play, and it was amazing how they were able to do it. And the reason why, and David kind of touched on this a little bit, is because they probably have 90% seniors starting, and Oscar Smith was a very young team. So they have 10 to 15 Division I players, but they have, I think, 6 or 7 sophomores. And I mean, it's crazy that the seniors, that's a big difference when you have seniors that, have that experience that hang with those young guys. Um, but yeah, it is great to see that. And I was really hoping Madison could do it. It wasn't quite Hoosiers or West Springfield, um, but it was close.
Close.
I
So
got one more
yeah,
tidbit. When Fort Hunt beat Archbishop Malloy,
Lloyd.
yes,
Kenny
Kenny Smith,
Smith.
Kenny Smith. I mean, I didn't see this. Preston was there, but Preston said, "Oh man, Kenny Smith came in for a dunk, and his feet were at Preston's like chin or something like that. You know, some
It
crazy.
was Steve Landon. It was like
Huh?
Steve Landon. It was Steve Landon. I was on the audience.
But I mean, I'm talking about when Kenny Smith came in for a dunk. Not that
Yeah.
Steve Landon couldn't do it, but I'm saying that you were like, oh man, I saw Kenny Smith from Archbishop Malloy. He came in for a dunk. It's like his feet were like right here to me or something like that. And I was like, oh, what? And then before I knocked off Archbishop Malloy. So, again, you play it on, you play it. You got to play, right? And so I
Later
understand
in the
all
game.
the things that we talk about, right? Pardon me. We got some keyboard athletes, right, including me, who talk, oh, yeah, da, da, da. But bottom line, I think it's just beautiful to see the games, and I love to see it, and I'm jealous of you, honestly, Julian, being there to see that game played because you came back. That was just the most amazing. And I talk about those games where I've seen these things like Grant Hill, South Lakes versus Wakefield.
yeah,
Oh
Oh my
man,
gosh, I came back for that the 1990s. That was the most high flying game I've ever seen in my life.
yeah,
Best regional final ever. I don't care about private school or whatever. That
that was
was
amazing.
right. And
yeah.
so that's what I'm talking about. You remember those times, and you know
Yeah.
those times. So that is the excitement that I imagine happened yesterday
Yeah,
with
the
the
only difference between that South Lakes Wakefield game, this game, that was a huge upset, and Wakefield actually pulled it off. And it wasn't a huge upset in that they didn't deserve to win, but everyone just figured South Lakes was going to win. And Kenya Hunter and Travis Spencer and Rayfield Boyd, they had a different idea. But that gym, there was like 6,000 people there that
oh
night, and
man,
the
it was
energy
beautiful.
was unbelievable. This
Beautiful.
this game yesterday, I mean, the crowd was into it, the players were into it, but it's 35 degrees outside. I'd say you probably had like 3 or 4 thousand people there. I mean, everybody, it was electric, but you could not touch Robinson High School when Grant Hill and his team were there. I mean, it was sold out. I remember those days. I came
As
back from school.
we're reminiscing before we go back on topic, I will also say, the Woodson TC games,
Yeah,
with Amaker against E and all those guys. I mean,
those are unbelievable.
just
At TC versus West Potomac, 1905
the football.
in football. 15,000 people,
Really?
15.
Where,
standing room only.
where was it?
TC.
Oh,
Standing room. Both stands are full.
This is when TC was ranked number 4, right? When you guys beat them? Or 3.
That's
Okay, 3 in the
three,
nation.
man.
Yeah.
Don't,
Okay.
TC was ranked number 3. We knocked them off. Right. So, right. And the guys on that team, I knew all those dudes from TC, right? But at the same time, that game was 15th sold out. Crazy. I mean, imagine a high school game like this and stands that aren't really meant to take them, and we win, and West Potomac rushes the field, right? That is just as a junior in high school with my teenage ego, you can't top that experience. It's hard. I mean, that experience can be topped, but it's hard to top that experience in terms of athletics, right? In terms of just being able to be in that environment. And so that's where I say that, again, it's one of those things where with Madison, I just give all the credit in terms of their ability to play up like that.
so one
But
of the interviews that I'm sorry, go ahead, Preston.
what really is so concerning now, and I think that what I think that what you stand to lose, then what you stand to lose when we start talking about charters and all of these is that, you have these neighborhoods, you have these communities, and you have these like this competition, and it's all connected to community.
Yeah,
It's all connected to community. And when you have like when you have these other groups that are coming in, you may have more, there may be more talent, there may be more a lot of things, but you lose the community.
yeah,
That's the that's the concern, right? That's the concern. And when we think about like school choice, that's a lot of the concerns. Because like when I alluded to when we were talking about like all of these issues with choice, it turns out that one of the groups, communities that are not really big fans of voucher programs are rural communities. They're rural communities because, you know, um, vouchers stand to possibly break up these schools. And these schools are not just places of learning, but they're places of community. They're places where people are together. You know, people know each other for years and generations, and they're all like there, and there's that bond. And that when you start introducing these programs, and there's an argument for them, but there is that loss of community, there is that loss of support that people, really don't really get. And that's been what's been informing a lot of my research because, you know, a lot of what's helped me to appreciate the idea of what happens when schools close is that I'm the last graduating class of a high school.
Right.
Fort Hunt and Groveton, I mean, and Fort Hunt closed. And, you know, and people talk to this day, or, you see all the people who are at that high school talking to this day about how wonderful the education was in that high school. And it was.
Yeah.
But, you know, but it's talking about that loss.
Yeah.
So loss of school, that bond in that community is really, really important. And I think that's just something that people, really don't get. And so that's what we have to think about, as an educational policy, wonky, nerdy thing about kind of like about vouchers and charters. Like, if you're going to do these things, how do you do them in a way where you can have these choices, these opportunities that we're talking about, like where people make choices to go to school for, they like this program, they like this idea, but where you also have a system where public schools are also there too.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of the big deal that we have going forward. And that's the big concern. That's the big concern right now um, because right now these programs are threatened to run amok, really. Just I mean, I honestly think my position is that people think my research, they'll say you're anti-choice, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not anti-choice, but I'm pro-public school system. And I think that we have to find a way that we can balance, you know, public schools and these other like alternatives such that they can be in that system, And so the Hayfield discussion,
Yeah.
from my yeah, I joke that I will, if I will talk about this in class, I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Definitely going to talk about this in school because this is sort of like the unintended impact of, of choice programs. This is the sort of issues that people feel, that they think, when they start experiencing it, they go, wait a second, I like choice, but I don't like that.
Yeah.
So, so how do you balance that so that people have those options and that we still have these systems and these communities as well?
The biggest challenge to me about school choice and vouchers, and you know more about this than me, obviously, but it's hard to, if it doesn't work, it's hard to undo the damage. So, like, say you bring on these programs and schools close because of it, and then the school just really doesn't work, and and then, well, you can't like reopen the public. It's hard to like reopen the public school. So, what happens to these kids? That's the problem is that these things are they're very hard to change once you implement them. So, but
Excellent point. Excellent point.
yeah, but hopefully we can be optimistic about it. Well, look, guys, I want to thank you again for obviously doing this interview. It's been great, fascinating. You guys are incredible American success stories. But also all the help on the social media. I think we've created a really fun community. I think people enjoy watching the games and arguing about stuff. When it first started, David, during the lockdown, it was more of the old days, but we've really done, you
Right.
guys didn't mention Wilder from Groveton, but when Wilder and uh, and Gary Ford, when they beat, was it Lee 3 times a year or Mount Vernon 3 times a year? But we talked about those things. Now it's kind of evolved into a little bit of that, and also, what's going on today, which has been interesting. But anyway, guys, I just want to thank you for all that help, and obviously thank you for doing this interview as well. Uh, but you guys have any final thoughts?
I just love connecting back to the Northern Virginia Legends groups
Yeah,
because I'm a sports nut,
yeah,
right? And so I'm looking at film, I'm looking at tape, I'm assessing players. I'm doing that anyway.
yeah.
If I'm tired of like doing research and reading papers, I'm looking at players, I'm breaking down tendencies, I'm checking out teams. So it gives me an outlet, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. I
Me too.
would,
Yeah,
and I would second that. Like, I sit here and I'm reading like early 20th century legislation and other stuff, but I'm a basketball nerd. I'm a
yeah,
basketball history nerd, and I'm a high school basketball history nerd. And
yeah,
so, you know, I think that the Legends group really provided that opportunity really to go back and learn about like all the people, whom I grew up with, right? But also to see just how things are changing,
yeah,
you know, just, just looking at the talent and looking at how things are different and looking, for instance, let's looking how differently people are playing, right?
yeah, yeah,
How the game is, how high school games have evolved, where everybody is shooting 3-pointers. If I even step down the 3-point line, coaches are going to yell at me and I'm like, oh, I can hit that, clang. And then they're now, 7-footers are out there doing that. And so it's really fun. And I think in all of these things are just great communities,
yeah. It's
all
very,
of
it is very different, the community, that we created. I also, it's weird. A lot, you guys are really into the sports, and I am too. But I've also become like curious about just the history of the schools. Like, for example, I was out in
yes,
Loudoun County High School the other day watching a friend of mine's son playing, and they had all the flags of all the high schools in Loudoun County, and the first one was Loudoun County High School in 1956. So,
Well,
um, and I knew Frederick Douglass had opened in 1941. That was a black high school here, but I couldn't. So when I came home, I couldn't find what the high school's name was before Loudoun County. I mean, I did the research. I couldn't, and it just really bothered me because I knew before Loudoun County they had to have a high school, but I wasn't able to figure out what high school that was. But I figured out Fairfax County was the last of all the northern counties in Virginia to have a school for black students.
yes.
Warren County was second last, but all the other counties like Loudoun and Alexandria, Arlington, Fauquier, they all had a school for black high school students before we did. And so I've actually become almost a historian of high schools, which is weird, but it's just something that I just find interesting sometimes.
But
So
one thing to throw out, we need to do this, we definitely need to do this. And I hope Ronald Reeves, if you're listening,
yeah, we got
Bruno,
to do that. Every
you,
time I try to contact him, he doesn't get back. I can't figure out how
well,
to contact
I'm
him.
just I'm going to give this shout out to you, Bruno, to Ronald.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy, and plus,
Ronald's an interesting guy. He went to school at Luther Jackson, right?
out in the country.
Incredible athlete.
Yeah,
And
yeah, he was built. I would
I
love to
didn't
have.
know, I didn't know he was such a great athlete until we start talking after,
Yeah.
through this group. And, and his cousin Jimmy Lewis, Coach
Oh,
Lewis,
they're
right?
cousins. I didn't know they're
Yeah, they're
cousins.
cousins, they're cousins, right? And, so I think getting Bruno and Lewis on there, Coach Lewis, to talk about the good old days would be a great one. And
Yeah, and then
so
and
maybe even a.
I want to expand this, but so Mr. Reeves and my uncle, right, went to Drew Smith School in Gum Springs growing up, right? So they were classmates. And so that's where I talk about the connection among African Americans in Northern Virginia, is that these communities are really connected to each other, and these people going back generations know each other.
Right.
So, it's again, you get over into Charles, Houston, go over in town, and my mom starts talking about various people she knows there and all sorts of stuff, man. It's just like, wow,
Yeah.
so much to learn.
Yeah, that's great.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, guys, look, man. Again, this has been great, man. I really appreciate all. I was going to spend 45 minutes. We've already spent almost 2 hours, so this has been
I
great.
got a lot to edit.
Yeah, I don't like to edit. I just as is.
Okay.
But guys, this is great. Let's do it again. Maybe we'll get Bruno on and maybe some more of your cousins because you guys are related to everybody. You guys have a bigger family than
Well,
Alex.
they'll
Alex
claim us
Haley.
now. Phil.
Is
They'll
that
claim us, some of us now.
exactly? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, guys, look, have a wonderful Sunday. If I don't talk to you, have a great Chris how season's greetings, but I'm sure
You
we'll
too.
talk before then.
Sounds great.
All right, guys, enjoyed it.
All right.
Peace.